Ladies and gentlemen, here today, I have with me my sister, Anna Louise Lesher.
Hello.
And all the way from North County, San Diego, isn't it?
Yeah, North County. It's been raining a lot here, so we're feeling like we're in England. If it rains 2 days in a row, everybody's, got their wellies on up to their eyeballs and just crying. Yeah.
Poor Californians, they do not like to be wet.
They do not. There's something falling from the sky, they say.
Causes great confusion. For those people who don't know, how long have you been living in America for?
I've been here nearly 20 years, actually.
And you are a full-blown American, aren't you?
Oh, you're going to try and rile me up right at the beginning of this interview. Look,
you are though, aren't you?
No, stop it. I do have a passport, but I'm English, thank you.
You're an American citizen, right?
Yeah, I am, but I have a British passport as well. I like to just ride the line there because I worry that if I ever need to escape, I've got to go back somewhere.
Sentimental attachment to the motherland there. I'm legally an American. I'm still British, damn you.
Correct. That's exactly how I feel. I want to live
here. To do recolonize all over again. Still British. This household is still a British household.
Yeah. I make my kids say certain words with an English accent. I'm like, no, you've got to say it like this though. I can't, like water. That's my one. I can't do the water. And I'm like, no.
Well, and they are American. I regret to inform you.
Yeah, they remind me every day. Yeah.
I remember trying to explain to Charlie, like he was asking me why can't you stay longer, Uncle Rich? I was like, because I don't live in this country. He was like, what's a country? I was like, you live in America. I live in another country called England. And he was like, why? What is that? Why?
But why?
Why can't you stay? I was like, because it makes the police very angry if I stay too long. So narcissistic abuse, is that something you know anything about?
I feel like we grew up in the same household, so
I vaguely remember you from those times. Yes.
Yeah, from back in the day. And then I've really had an excellently fun time in my adult life, just recreating some of those snippets of childhood and playing them out as an adult to realize that they're still shit and they can't be solved with a magic wand. Yeah.
No, weirdly enough, I've also had a go with that game. Not that much fun, actually. In the end, It wasn't as fun as I thought it might be.
Yeah, not as fun as you remembered.
It sucked then, and it sucks now.
Yeah.
So your approach, I mean, you do well. We both work in therapy effectively. Yours is that you focused on, and this has been for the last 20 years, hasn't it? It's been more physical than psychological, hasn't it?
Yes, I've started in massage therapy, so I've been in body work for a long time, and then at some point I sort of figured out that you're really accessing all parts of a human being when you're touching their body. You're in a very safe and a very intimate environment with somebody, and they really allow parts of themselves to be uncovered. And so as you're moving through releasing somebody's hamstring, you could, as people spontaneously cry on a massage table, they spontaneously start telling you a story about childhood. They start to connect with you in different ways that they're not always consciously aware of. Like frequently at the end of deep massages, people will say, oh, that was really interesting. I've never really had an experience like that before. And so then as I started to go through working through my layers of trauma and using different tools, I started to just add on to and realized how I could use massage as a foundation to build into working into therapy with people.
I don't think I've ever asked you this before, but you must have the experience of working with people. They'll come in and they'll tell you what they think their problem is. They'll be like, oh, the problem is in my left shoulder or something. And then you find through the work, it's actually somewhere else completely.
Yes. So my clients who I've been seeing for years come in and say something that sounds very much like, I feel like my right shoulder is hurting, but you just do what you do and then tell me.
Okay. That's trust.
Yeah.
So there is a mirror there for the more of the psychological work, where I would say like, and now you're doing more of this work. I'm sure you've had the same experience. 90% of the time, people really can't track accurately what their problem is. They'll have a story of what the problem is, and they'll come to you with a narrative. But when you actually start doing the work, you usually find it somewhere else, don't you?
Absolutely. And there's a big parallel for that, which is how much our nervous systems can cope with at any one time. So you stick to a story so that you're not peeling back too many layers. And the same will happen in body work, where you uncover one thing just to get to the next layer. And it might be deeper in that same area, or it could be in a completely different area where they'll say, now my right shoulder feels better, but my left hip's killing me. And they're like, something went wrong. And I go, great, we're getting somewhere, you know.
Progress.
Yeah, it's the same in psychological therapy. I found exactly the same thing, that as you but you have to titrate somebody's nervous system, right? Like, even if I could see from story one, I'm like, oh, I see where this is going. It's almost unfair to sort of rip the Band-Aid off for somebody, and you allow them to uncover it in their own time so that their nervous system is able to function through it and deal with it appropriately.
That's what you do when you're being compassionate and respectful of the human being in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we don't really give people therapy in exactly the same way.
My methodology is much more brutal.
I've been in group coaching sessions with you, and I'm like, oh.
Well, my attitude is usually like, life is too short for all this going on in the houses. But as a generalization, I think I can say that for people who do want a more gentler experience, well, you go at a more of an organic pace, don't you, with people?
I do.
Body work.
Because that was my personal experience. You know, when I went through what was the most traumatic period of my life, when I came to the other side of it, I was like, oh my goodness, I've been lying to myself for a year. And then the more that I've learned about psychology and the nervous system and how the two things integrate, it wasn't that I was lying to myself. It was that I was literally unable to process the truth, because the fear of the truth I felt would have killed me. And so my survival instincts had all these layers of walls up, and I needed to move through those walls gradually. It didn't make sense for me to go from point A to point Z immediately.
Yes. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I think, you know, always learning, always adapting. And I think your focus on the body has had an impact on the way I approach the therapeutic process now, where I can see those gaps there where, you know, it's not just a mental problem. We talk about psychology and the mental health, but there's no such thing as a mental problem without a physical problem, or physical without a mental, really, is there?
No way. I mean, just your mental, your physical, and your emotional body are all so intertwined. There's just no way that you could pull them all apart and say, this lives over here, this lives over here. It just doesn't, we don't operate like that as human beings. Although we try very hard.
We try. It sounds cruel and psychopathic, which is why it works for me. I think, so the process that you go through, even though you've been working more with the body than on the psychology side, it actually at the intuitive level sounds very similar though, which is you work through, say, if I'm working through the psychological body, which is a sort of a dark space, it's an unmapped space at the psychological level, with moving through until something hurts, until I find a part that is sore. And then you try and figure out through feedback from the client and through what you yourself can feel mechanically that this is probably why this part is inflamed, and then fix that. You're doing that intuitively though, right? There's not really a science to that.
That's what I was going to say. That's the sort of the difference between the top down to bottom up therapy, and what I do is much more bottom up therapy, so it's very somatically informed. So whether it's body work or coaching with a client, a lot of the initial work is all very intuitive. And then once the client's nervous system attunes to my nervous system and they sort of start speaking, it's almost like receiving information behind the information. You know, it's the same, you would talk about it as in reading people's body language is huge. And for me, it's just it's just receiving information in a way that I'm not consciously aware of. And then once that starts happening, my analytical brain starts kicking in and starts connecting the dots behind the scenes. And that happens in both body work and psychology.
Yeah. I think some of the best sessions and the fastest turnarounds I've had with people have been using the maximum amount of intuition, and which is, it's kind of tricky in a way, because obviously in psychology they're always trying to be science, trying to be as academic.
How do you measure it?
Can you measure this? Can you replicate it? When you say intuition, what does that mean, kind of a thing? I've largely given up on, I just think people are suffering. If you can reduce the suffering, who cares? Unless you're lying to people and you're like, oh, I'm removing alien parasites from your spine, and it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting the job done.
I agree with that.
What's been your preferred, as a client of therapy yourself, what caused the most and the strongest and longest lasting shifts for you? What modality?
Inner child work, 100%.
Inner child work.
Just straight to the
I mean, it's,
but I only started doing that, I can say that. So major trauma, year later, oh my God, I've been lying to myself for a year. That's when I started inner child work. If I'd have started inner child work in the midst of my breakdown, I don't think I would have had the capacity to connect in the way that I needed to in order to be able to create the foundation that I needed to really evolve as a human being. Like inner child. So I'm part of a modality that's called inner child somatic reparenting. So it's exactly what it sounds like. You're reparenting your inner child using your body. And it completely changed how I felt about myself. It changed prior belief systems. It changed the way that I think about things, because I'd always been in a pattern of, well, that's just the way I am. Well, that's just the way I respond to things like that. Well, that's just how I feel when X happens. And connecting with the pieces of me that felt broken and unheard gave me the opportunity to rewrite the script and say, do you know what? Maybe there's no script. And every time you go through this, you feel differently. And every time it happens, you can say something else, feel something else, behave in a different way. And it's opened so many doors for me. So that for me has been the biggest thing. I do a lot of other stuff as well. Like I don't do inner child work every day, sort of in my own life.
Who does?
I mean, I check in a lot. But, breath work and yoga, I definitely do those every day, because there's such great ways of, yoga, what a great way to get into your body, and it feels good, and you can focus internally instead of externally. Breath work, you can completely change your own physiology and therefore your state of mind in 3 to 5 minutes. 3 rounds of breath of fire and I am a different person.
There's a lot there that you said that I would like to unpack. So when you're doing yoga and breath work, you're still effectively, I think you implied, doing inner child work, because you do that whilst checking in with the inner child. You
can. You don't always have to, because as the face that you pulled, a lot of people find inner child work, particularly for the first year or two, it feels draining, and it can. But then when you get to the point where you're friends, then you can actually really just check in. And what starts happening is that instead of, when you go to check in, this inner child, your inner child might be raging and writhing and fighting, or your inner child might be just sad and forlorn and alone. And instead of always walking into that face, which is an emotional drain, your inner child starts to just feel at peace. And sometimes you go in and check in and your inner child's actually happy already, and you're not even there yet, or they're excited to see you or something. There is a full spectrum shift. When you're shifting, your inner environment shifts as well.
Interesting. You mentioned somatic inner child reparenting, and that's a modality that you're trained in right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about what that is and what your experience of getting trained in that was?
Yeah, so I'm still in it now, because she just developed the course. I've been doing it for a couple of years, but she just made a certification for it. So It's an extended meditation where you start at the level, like the psychological level of what's happening, and then you go into the emotions behind that, and then you go into the somatics of it. Where does that live in your body? And then you sort of go into like a somatic experiencing meditation where you're really talking about what's happening in that area of your body. And then you start to communicate with that area, and that blends into like a regressive meditation where you go and do work with that part of self that's stuck in an environment, and you go back and you have a conversation with that part of self, and you're providing for that version of inner child what they need so that you can let it go. I mean, I feel like when somebody experiences trauma, whether it's capital T trauma or all of the micro traumas that you experience, it's almost like a part of you gets stuck behind a glass wall. You know, you're traveling this timeline of life, and then you hit up against a trauma, and a little piece of you gets stuck behind, and the rest of you carries on. But this little part of you is still like, wait, hang on, that sucked, and nobody's listening, and nobody cares, and I'm sat here alone and crying. And so that's really what a lot of the work is pulling out all of those feelings so that you know where to go, giving you the map of where to go, and then safely and going back to that place and having like a really basic, simple conversation, and just shifting the experience that version of self is having. It's incredibly freeing. It's so powerful.
So there's almost like little parts of yourself get stuck, frozen in time, and then we go back, identify the individual fragments, and negotiate and reintegrate them, kind of a thing.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And that's who's the lady that you're training to do that with?
Her name is Dr. Summer Nicole. She's rad. She started as a physical therapist, and then, you know, same sort of path, but she's just years ahead of me on it, where she was like, hang on, all these pieces aren't connecting, and there's part of physical therapy that I'm not able to access in this just solely Western medical system. And so what else do I need to bring into it to really develop? So she's brought in 20 years of all of her therapeutic on all levels experience to create this new system.
It's fascinating. I don't do much somatic work, as you know, and I don't really do that much inner child work, as you know, because I'm working remotely with people, and I know how much crying there can be. I don't want to like finish a Skype session with somebody like, well, your time's up, cheerio.
Honestly, the meditations that we do are usually half an hour. It's not like the traditional inner child work where you're digging into the mine of doom, and then you find this traumatized being, and you've got to like carry it back up out of the mine. It doesn't feel like that, you know. You're going back, you're having a chat, you're making a 4-year-old feel happy in a way that's appropriate to a 4-year-old. Do you want to go outside? Do you want to hug? Do you want to play a game? You know, they let you know what you want, and you provide that for them. And then you say, you know, I'll come back and check in with you. And I'm here now. That's the biggest piece of it, right? Is it's letting yourself know that you are the one that is present. I always remember you, that video you put out years ago that got loads of kickback, where you'd said, and you've said it many times recently, but I remember the first one where you said
the video that pissed people off. I don't.
Oh, what? And you said, you know, basically you're saying the work is all on you. I'm not your friend. I'm never going to come to your door. I'm never going to come knocking and ask you if you're doing the work. It's all down to you. And people were just outraged that you were so mean. But, you know, that's the truth is the truth is the truth. You know, it's like there is no magic pill. There is no magic wand. You do have to do the work. You do have to do it yourself. And it is only you in the end. And so that inner child work to me is just a way of really reassuring yourself that that's what's happening. You're showing up for yourself so that you can start to trust yourself again, because we all start in this place, if you're deeply traumatized, where you don't know who you are, you don't know how to make a decision, you're not sure if your choices are correct, you're always looking outside of you for somebody else's control because you don't trust yourself. And that's just, for me, it was such an immediate and effective way of creating that trust again.
It's great. It sounds like a way's been found to do what was traditionally quite heavy and quite deep, but necessary work, but in a way that is a bit more organic and accessible and less, well, you've used the word draining a few times now. And unfortunately, as great as inner child work is, the way I did it It was tough. I mean, it brought great relief, and the same, like the biggest shifts I've ever had in my life was through inner child work. But you would never say one looked forward to a session.
We did. Well, I did inner child work before about 10 years ago, and it was through a somatic experiencing, but a bit more of the kind of like drag out version. And yeah, it didn't land as deeply with me. I think because I was always resistant going in, because after the first one, you're like, this is horrifying. I'm going to put some shields up, And so I think it just didn't, that ended up working against itself, and it didn't end up doing the work that it was supposed to do.
Interesting. There's actually, I have a memory now, one of your friends in Encinitas, when I released that video that said, I'm not your mate, I'm not coming around your house to help. She'd put me on like the big screen in a house, and she sent it me on Instagram. She'd filmed it. And when I said, I'm not coming around your house to help, she was like, what the fuck, Richie? And then sorry, those dishes ain't going to wash themselves.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, you've been traveling a lot for years, and when I started learning about narcissistic abuse, I know you'd been in Malaysia, but then you'd already gone to America, but I was in Malaysia.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether we've ever really had this conversation before. Did you know what narcissistic personality disorder was? Did you have an opinion on it, say back in 2012 sort of time?
No, I really didn't fully, that was probably right before it came onto my radar. I think Malaysia was a few years before that.
Yes, it was.
Really
Malaysia was 2008.
Yeah. But that's when it came onto my radar, was 2012, 11, 12, somewhere in there was where I actually, it's the story you tell all the time. You're like, what the hell is going on? And then you start researching and you're like, oh,
So around 2012, around the same time, you would have been looking into the same subject that I was looking at.
Yeah.
What? Oh, I know who.
Well, you're about to ask me what triggered that.
Okay, so let me ask you the question naively, because I was there and I remember. What were the things that were confusing that were making you look for information online about narcissistic personality disorder?
Being in a relationship where the truth was never quite the truth. There was always several versions of truth, and there was a lot of what we now know is gaslighting, but a lot of why did you put it on the left-hand side? Because you yelled at me yesterday about putting it on the right-hand side. I would never do that. I always want it on the right-hand side, just things like that. But it was, and that's very small. And as you know, they can turn into very, very big things. And the person that I was with then was extremely violent and extremely volatile. So when he would just decide that he was going to get upset, and as a pretty intuitive person, it's like the friction in the room would start like crawling up my ankles, and nothing would be happening yet. Like everything would be fine. We'd be making a cup of tea, and I was like, I just know it's coming. I just know it's coming. Something's going to be on the left or the right, or it's going to be blue, not green, or, and I really, as a sensible human who thought that I loved this person and wanted to help, I was looking for, what can I do? What can I change in my behavior to help you from being psychotic?
Not enjoying these psychotic rages at all.
I really am having a difficult time with your violent outbursts. I'm bored. We lived in a studio, and the only place with a door was a walk-in wardrobe behind the bed, and it didn't have a lock, but it had a door. And so I'd be in there like piling stuff up. He was a big dude. He was like 6'4", twice the weight of me. I mean, when he was in a rage, it was absolutely terrifying. But I thought that my job was to help him stop getting into a rage. It was really my job was
as though the rage was like a third factor outside of the relationship that you could work on together.
Right.
And so how did you start building up a picture of a narcissistic personality disorder? Was this from reading stuff online?
Yeah, and you got really into it at that time as well. And so it was I was obviously following a lot of what you were doing. I just sort of got into psychology in general. at that point. And, you know, and then I was in massage school then as well. And so, you know, getting more into the type of work like Bessel van der Kolk, and how psychology integrates with the human body and where they meet in the middle, and where does trauma live in the body. And that was still, I mean, that was still very like not in modern literature at that point. You know, it wasn't commonplace to say trauma lives in the body. People would go, I mean, it doesn't really though, does it? I mean, it doesn't literally live in the body. Whereas in massage school, we were like, no, I think it does. You know, but it was still quite.
Where else would it live? In the bank? In your coveted home?
Just somewhere ethereal, I think, you know. And so it was sort of, because I was already in massage school, I was already linking those two things. So it makes a lot of sense that I've got to where I am now and all the other things I've picked up along the way, because they all sort of make everything make sense, you know, as I've been weaving my way through understanding all of this in my way. You know, you came at it from a very different angle because you started with a psychology degree, whereas I sort of was in massage school when I got interested in it. So I've always been on the somatic side of it. And when I separated from that guy that we were just talking about, the type of therapy, I had three therapists for a while. I was struggling. And I was in therapy 2 to 3 hours a week, but I had one, you know, let's sit on a couch opposite each other and talk therapist. And then I had two somatic experiencing therapists who were, let's, you know, mind travel, let's create journeys and go different places and find out who you are through what you're feeling in your body. And the other one was like, let's roll around on the floor and play with balloons. And I mean, I definitely did some weird stuff trying to figure out how I fit into this reality in which narcissistic personality disorder was a thing. And I was already getting into, I think this is a pattern. I think I'm trained to magnetize this now. So I need to start understanding what that is and what that looks like and how at some point I can break that.
I'm going to ask you questions so I don't know you. What do you think? What do you think the cause? What do you think the cause of this was? Well, we're laughing, but that's only to cover up the tears, ladies and gents. Good times, good times. Where did this come from?
We grew up in a very interesting household. Very interesting. I think I don't remember as much of our childhood as you do, because you're a few years older than me, and you're also a bit less flighty than I am. You actually live in the real world a bit more than I do.
Anna's gift is tuning out.
Right. La 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 la, and then there was a rainbow. Oh, it's so much nicer over here. You guys should really be over here. Whatever the hell you're yelling about is horrible. And so I think there's certainly elements of levels of abuse that I don't really remember, and that's also the type of work that I do, is that you don't have to dig up the story. You don't need to know what happened. So I've gone back to many places in my childhood where I could tell you where I am and I can tell you how I feel, but I still couldn't tell you what happened. And I am totally super with that. I don't need to go back into whatever had just happened that made me feel that way, but I can still deal with the emotional fallout, and I can still help, you know, that child version of self that got stuck there. So our household growing up was interesting. I don't know how detailed you want to go.
Oh no, good Lord. That would be entirely traumatic for me and for people listening. But I do want to ask the question, do you think that impacted the type of men that you ended up becoming attracted to? Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, our dad was very non-present, very narcissistic, he was an adulterer. That's my first ever memory, is my dad had cheated on my mum with Pam up the road, and I can tell you where we are and what happened and the row, and I can tell you, I have no idea who Pam is, but I'm pretty sure that was the name. And that was a repeated cycle throughout.
Her son still watches me to this day because of the trauma he went through.
God, I can't.
So he'll probably catch this. Anyway, carry on.
I made
yeah.
And he was always sort of doing his own thing and then coming back and just being god awful to my mum about it. And the role modeling that I got as a female from our mum is that you just keep chasing the thing and you just keep trying to do better, and then sometimes you get pissed off and so you mimic the horrible behavior to try and get payback. And it was just, I mean, the cycle was just horrible, but that was, you know, that was their cycle. And so I think, you know, in that really psychological cliche is you recreate the environment that you lived in as a child in order to be able to fix it as an adult. And so I've tried that from several different angles now, where I'm like,
what's the success rate you're working with right now?
Yeah, well, I can absolutely tell you that I'm single on purpose.
So pretty good then, pretty good.
Oh, wow. I got to a place and my mind is quiet and I'm like, no, I really just don't want to date. I just am so peaceful and happy. No, I'm good. Yeah, my success rate has been very challenged. But I've tried, you know, like this is the violent aspect of it. This is the controlling aspect. This is the adultering aspect. You know, I really have, yeah, I really I've tried. This is the absentee, you know, the non-available love aspect. I've tried all of that.
As you know, and have at times witnessed firsthand, I've also tried to fix these things. I found that weirdly, like going to yin yoga and doing meditation helped because of the submission side of it, and actually just putting my ego to one side and saying, I've failed here and I'm not going to win. Do you think that's important to do in these kinds of relationships, to just say, I actually am not capable of doing what needs to be done here?
Within the relationship or for yourself? Both. I think if you've got that level of nous in the relationship, then that's your cue to leave.
Yeah, you threw me there because I was like, I don't think I've ever thought that in the relationship. No.
Yeah.
Would
if you've got to that, but you know, that's a lot of the clients that I'm working with now, though, is, you know, they've been married 30-40 years. And so they don't really know an existence outside of it. So they are at that point.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to facilitate leaving. And it is a very complex process. But yes, I think that's the point of meditation. That's a lot of the purpose of breath work. It's certainly a lot of the purpose of yoga is, you know, how do you create space? How do you create space between your thoughts? How do you create space between a thought and an action, a thought and a response, a thought and even listening, you know? Because if you can create space in real time in the moment, because that's all practice, right? You're practicing in yoga and in breath work to create space, meditation. And then if you can do that in real time, that's when you can actually begin to manage yourself as a personality, because it's not right or fair to think, I'm going to do this work so that I'm not going to be triggered, because that's not reality. You're still going to live in the world. You're still going to walk around. You're still going to interact with other humans. So you're still going to be triggered. But the reality is, can I create enough space in the moment that I can remember what to do while I am negotiating with these parts of personality? Because you go into a different zone when you get triggered, but you can have. So that this is part of the nervous system work that I do, is how do you start to recognize what's happening in your body? So what are your sort of somatic red flags where you're like, oh, this is where I'm about to go off the handle. This is where I'm about to dissociate. This is where I'm about to fly into a rage, whatever it is. And so that you can rein it in that moment, and you can then you get to choose. Can you go away from where you are? Can you take 3 breaths? Can you go outside? Can you stop the communication? Can you, like, what are your choices in that moment? But if you can't create a space, you don't have a pause point, you've got no choices. You just go A to B, go. Yeah,
I think via 2 very different circuitous routes, we both came to that conclusion that it's incredibly important to create a gap, that space, as you say, between what is happening in external reality and how we're responding in the internal reality. Because if there's no space, you're crazy and you stay crazy.
Yeah. And the thing is too, it's like, it's learning that separation, right? It is what's happening in your internal reality. And for me, it's addressing my internal reality and saying, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and I will come back to you. But the adult me is staying in control right now, and I'm going to deal with this external reality.
Yeah.
And
where I wanted to talk to you about breath work because you're more into it than I am. I've started doing a little bit more of it, a bit more regularly.
well,
Why is it breath work? I find it helps me get to sleep a lot. Like I struggle with insomnia, as you know, I've done for years.
yeah.
Breath work before sleep massively helps. What is it that we're doing when we're doing breath work? So if I do 10 minutes of breath work, that's definitely going to improve the quality of my sleep. Why would that work? Why is that a thing?
It depends what type of breath work you're doing, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. Like there's the pressure in your body, so it's changing pressure in your body. It's also changing the levels of CO2 and O2 in your body. And so when you're increasing your O2, you're going to increase your relaxation, your parasympathetic nervous system. It's all about limbic system, and it's about, if you can just take a deep inhale into your belly and blow slowly out of your nose. You're activating your vagus nerve, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. And so you're just in one breath, you can already start to slow everything down and start to sort of find that equanimity in your body. If you're chest breathing or your mouth breathing or you're, breathing shallowly, then you're really going into sympathetic nervous system. So part of what we teach is you meet somebody where they're at. So if somebody is already in a level of fight or flight, which honestly, if you're on the computer all of the time, so bad for your nervous system, that puts you into a level of fight or flight. You become hyper vigilant because you're hyper focused on the screen and you've got lights and noises and blah, blah, blah. And so you go into that breath work where you could start with a mouth breath, or you could start with a chest breath, you could start with faster breathing, and then you slow it down. It goes back to that sort of nervous system titration where you meet yourself where you're at, and then you move yourself to where you want to be.
I never heard that being on a screen is activating of fight or flight in and of itself. You said that it's because of the amount of the hyper focus on the screen and then the stimulation we're getting.
Yeah. If the only time that I cannot sleep is if I'm on a screen. I haven't watched TV in 20 years. And I've never really known why. I'm just like, oh, it's just not really my thing. And then
She's not even lying, folks. She's an extremely annoying hippie, and she genuinely doesn't fucking watch TV. Weirdo. Weirdo.
I've got other things. It's not the thing. And I've always, I just thought maybe I just don't really like what's on or whatever. But I've tried because, if my kids were spending nights away, I'm thinking, oh, I'm in the house by myself, I'll just watch something. And then I can't sleep for 3 hours.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm so not used to it. I don't work on a computer at all. The computer stuff is very new to me. And if I've figured out, say if I'm working with clients or if I'm working for you, I have to get off the computer minimum 2 hours before I need to go to sleep. Otherwise, there's no way I'm sleeping.
Oh, I think I'm some sort of a monk if I give myself 20 minutes before sleep. I'm like, I am so zen.
And then you wonder why you can't sleep. Your poor little nervous system's like, there's something else coming. There's something else coming.
I started to think of it as just like boring myself to sleep. I'm like, even if I can't bother to meditate, I'll just sit or lie and just look at the wall and just think thoughts slowly and just find that like everything starts to just slowly come down. But if I add breath work to it, which I've only been doing for about 3 weeks, it seems to massively help. So you're saying this is actually creating trackable, objective, we could verify this, we could track it, physiological changes in the body that can help with relaxation.
Yes, 100%. And that's all pretty new as well, but it's like there is research to back it already. Yeah. And it's becoming more and more popular, and then the research centers that are doing it are saying, well, actually meditate, it's more effective than meditation because the changes that you can get in a shorter time than meditation. So therefore it's more effective. It doesn't really matter. It's like whatever for me, I do both. I do all the things, and it's just whatever I feel like doing in that moment or on the day or.
I would I would imagine it would be more obviously I like meditation very much. I don't know much about breath work, but I would think it would be more effective than meditation because it's almost a guaranteed outcome. Meditation is kind of a skill, and you do need to be led into meditation. You do need to be then, you know, you can have a bad meditation session. I don't really know how you would have a bad breath work session. You're either doing it or you're not.
That's a very good point. I will say that for the longer breeds that I do, I always get to a point somewhere in the middle where I think, I hate this. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I do these long ones. Stupid. And I always, by the end, I'm like, oh, that was the best one. That was the best one. Nailed it.
The more you hate it in the middle, the more you'll love it at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So funny.
We should do a course on breath work. When you said you could do like a 10-second breath, we should teach people like, well, you should, a 10-second, a 30-second, a 1 minute, and then a 5-minute breath work. And then they could just pull it out and be like, oh, I've got 5 minutes spare and I can do
Absolutely.
this. And that would be easy to do, right? If we aimed it all at relaxation, aimed it all at bringing people down.
Yep, we can do that, definitely.
So if you were going to give somebody advice, say if someone, male or female, they're in a relationship with a narcissistically abusive person, what would you advise them to do? Just not even about leaving, but like the first thing that they can do if they realize they're in a narcissistically abusive relationship.
You have to reestablish a connection with yourself, because the only way that you've allowed yourself to be in a narcissistically abusive relationship is that you don't trust yourself and you don't have a connection to self.
Okay.
It's got to start there, because you're not going to get the power to leave. It's all well and good to say, you shouldn't let him do that, you should leave. Well, it doesn't mean anything when you don't know who you are and you've got no safe place to go home to. And I mean your own body, I don't mean your house. You know, like the external stuff you can figure out. But if you don't feel safe inside of your own body, then all that's going to happen is if you leave, you're going to go right back.
Interesting. I actually just advised somebody not to leave the narcissistically abusive relationship that he is in, because my intuitive sense was if you violently just like, I don't know, I watched an Oprah Winfrey episode, I'm going to do this and I'm free now. And in 2 months' time, you'll be right back with it. So what did you say? You said it in a way that was better than that.
If you don't have a safe place to go, then you'll go right back. And your body is the safe place to go, not a location.
So if a person doesn't have a connection to self and doesn't feel safe inside of their own body, then they're almost inevitably going to end up going back to the abuser because there's nowhere else for them to go.
Or to a new one, or they could pick a new one. But you know, you've got to find something, some element of control that provides safety for you. Yeah, so you wouldn't be in that kind of relationship without that. There's just no way. If you were sort of a healthy and regulated and grounded human, as soon as that MPD person walked into your life, then the red flags start bouncing off your forehead, because they do for all of us. And when you look back, you're like, no, I ignored that and that one. Yeah, ignored that one as well. You know, I mean, but as a normal regulated person where you don't need someone else to provide you with something, you would just be like, no, thank you. No, I'm sure you've got lovely bits to you. Not doing it. That broke one boundary. No, thanks. Yeah.
And there's nothing, people think of like being self-assertive or asserting boundaries as quite dramatic, but it really is just a no, thank you, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, other people don't even need to know what your boundaries are. You need to know what your boundaries are.
When you're doing, last question, when you're doing narcissistic abuse recovery work with people, is this what you focus on? Is it more about establishing a strong connection with self?
It really is. Yeah, because nothing else can come before that, you know, and people very much want to talk about the stories and talk about, you know, well, what about when he says blah, 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 blah. But the point will always go back to the only thing that's going to matter is how you feel. The only thing that's going to matter is who you are. The only thing that's going to matter is your connection with self, because then that's your first line of defense against anything. I mean, it's against what anybody says or what anybody can do to you. If you've got a safe place to go back to that is you, and you're not looking to that person to provide something for you, then you're not going to fall into this trap of, you know, oh, well, maybe I need that. maybe I need to go back to that. Maybe I'm now depleted because I'm not receiving this thing anymore. You have to get to a point where you feel complete just being by yourself.
Yeah.
And it sounds, I know how that sounds because I know how that sounded to me a few years ago. And I also know how devout I am in saying that now. I might know it's a very real reality, and it didn't take a lot of time, but it took a lot of work. And that's the big push for people, right? You actually have to, it is repetition, it is consistency, it is hours of your day, but do you want sovereignty or not?
Interesting. Well put. Well put. If people want to contact you for coaching, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
They can contact me through Spartan Life Coach, so anna@spartanlifecoach.com, and just shoot me an email there.
Excellent. Anna, thank you very much for your time. Ladies and gents, we're going to do a breathwork course, and if you want to get hold of Anna, she's available via that email there. Is there you have an Instagram as well? They can follow you.
Yeah, I do. It's all for body work at the moment, but it's going to start shifting. I'm doing a photo shoot in a couple of weeks, so it'll start shifting a little bit, but it's at North County Bodywork.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.